Thank you, Arvin, for that presentation on to help people build high-performance web apps. Along the same lines, we're going to hear next a presentation on technology to further the success of apps through their offline use. John Allsopp is an author, organizer of the Web Directions Conference series, and also helped significantly on the W3Conf planning committee. Please welcome John Allsopp. Thank you.
G'day. I need to give my obligatory a bit of Australianism. What I really like about this conference is that I think it reflects the web, the backgrounds of various people coming from all over the world, whether they work here in the US or work all over the world. I think the audience here and the voices you're hearing very much reflect the global nature of this event and of the web more broadly, which kind of really excites me, particularly as someone who comes from an admittedly privileged part of the global south. So, one of the great criticisms we hear about the web as a platform is it only works if you're online. And this is one of the strengths of native, apparently, is that it only works when you're online. But that's actually not true, and I'm going to talk about that today. And what I'm also going to talk about, well, what I'm talking about, will also help with performance. So it ties in with some of the themes we've been seeing here as well. I won't have time to really get into the details about how we can use the app cache for performance, but there's plenty of that online, and I've got some pointers at the end for you. So basically what we're going to look at is the HTML5 app cache. And for this magic to work, we need to do two things. We need to create an app cache manifest file, and then we need to link to this from our HTML documents, upload it, and serve it. And I'm going to try and tell you how to do all of this in 15 minutes, all right? Or 13 minutes and 5 seconds, as it is now. So there's plenty to get through, and I'm going to talk about some tips and tricks as well. So let's see how we go. All right, so an app cache manifest is simply a text file with a .appcache extension, and it specifies 3 kinds of resources for an application or a website. Those which must be cached and always used from the cache, those which must never be used from a cache, whether you're online or offline, and those that can be used as a fallback when someone is offline. By the way, the slides are all online. You don't have to write all this down, right? There won't be a test at the end. The app cache file, a simple text file that begins with the string cache manifest. And then it has one or more of 3 kinds of sections. We're going to look at each of these just for a minute. The cache, the fallback, and the network section. And we can also use comments. And each comment's a single line that starts with a hash. I'm going to see examples as well. So the cache section specifies which resources must be cached and must always be used from the cache, even if a person is online. So it has those 2 effects. It downloads or specifies what's to be downloaded, and then those should always be used regardless out of the cache. And we list these as URLs, either relative to the manifest file itself or as absolute URLs. And that's what it looks like. And now we have a cache manifest, an app cache manifest. So the cache is the string that begins the section, and then we comment to say these are some images, and we have a relative and an absolute URL. We then have the network section. And these are resources that should never be cached. So even when a person's offline, these should not be used. So it might be something like a login page and so on. And these can be either relative URLs, absolute URLs, or we can use a partial URL matching, or what's called a prefix match pattern, all right? So we can't use wildcards in the cache section, but we can kind of use wildcards here. And we also have an offline whitelist, or a wildcard that basically, if we use the asterisk as the entry, it basically says that everything we do not explicitly cache should always be used online. Right? We should always use the online version. So it's very much a shorthand to say if it's not in the cache, always use the online version, and when we're offline, that should effectively report an error. And that's what the next work section kind of would look like, although this is a bit of an artificial example because the asterisk there essentially kind of obviates the need for the rest of them. But we have a relative and an absolute, or 2 relative links, but we also then have that prefix match pattern, /payment/. And what that says is anything in the root directory, well, inside a subdirectory called payments of the root directory, anything in there, including subdirectories, you should ignore. You should not cache them, and you should always use the online version of those. All right. And then we have a fallback section. And this specifies which resources should be used if something's not been cached or if you're offline. All right, so it allows us to, for example, if we've got a load of images that haven't been downloaded, we can specify a specific image we preload that gets used in place of all of those, rather than simply a missing image thing that we see in a browser. All right, so the pattern for this is 2 entries. We have the first specifies which resources are going to be replaced, and the second part of this specifies the resources that will be used to replace anything that matches that pattern. Sorry, I've just jumped right to the end of my presentation. That's what happens when you build your own presentation systems, right? All right, nearly there. All right, so we got to the fallback. So what a fallback looks like is this. So there are 2 parts here. In the first line, we have images. So that's a partial match, prefix match, that says anything inside the subdirectory called images, inside the root directory, anything in there. If we're offline and we haven't cached those, then replace any of those images with missing.png. Or we can basically replace every single page in the site with a sorry.html. Right, so appcache gives us a lot of capabilities. I've only touched the surface of those, but what we've now done is we've created our cache manifest file, and it looks something like this. Cache manifest, we've given a version number, and I'll tell you why in a minute. We have a cache section, which caches some images. We've said if things are not in that cache section, they should never be cached, and we should always use the online version, and that includes the browser's own caching that's been around for a long time. It basically says bypass your own caching and use the online version at all times. And then we've given a fallback as well. So that is a nice, simple app cache. So now we have to use it. So how do we use this thing? All right. So what we need to do is link from an HTML document to our manifest file. So we've uploaded our manifest file. In the HTML element within our HTML document, we have a manifest attribute, the new attribute in HTML5. And within that manifest attribute, the value is a link to this manifest file. All right, so we link to the manifest file using the manifest attribute. And it is recommended we use this in conjunction with the HTML5 document type, just because the suggestion that certain browsers get a bit flaky if we don't do that. So combine it with the use of the HTML5 document type, rather than retrofitting it to our HTML4 documents and so on. And then we need to serve it, obviously. But there is a little catch here. Now, most of the time, browsers are pretty liberal in what they will receive from a server. However, in this case, they are not. If it is not served as a MIME type of text/cache manifest, then it will not be used. Right? So you must serve it in this way. And we'll look at why and what we do about it in a moment. But this is a common gotcha that throws people all the time. Why is it not working? Because most servers by default will not serve .appcache files with this MIME type. So you have to go and set that up. So consult your server, IIS or Apache server or whatever server you use for this. Right, and we've done. This will now work offline. We've got offline working perfectly. However, there are a few tips and tricks and a few gotchas. It is a newish technology, but it is, as we'll see, pretty widely supported. This is not blue sky. It's not this awesome, great thing which will be around at some point in the future. This is something we can be using today and is supported by most browsers. But there are some little gotchas well worth knowing about. So let's take a look at a few of the most common ones. Firstly, your cache will completely fail if even one of your resources that you included in it is not available. All right, so you have to verify your cache, or the whole thing falls over in a heap. Right? Really important to keep in mind. Persistence, right? How long do things cached persist for? Forever, effectively. Right? The specification is a little vague, but effectively forever. Right? And you cannot override this with HTTP headers like cache control, no cache. Right? This overrides all of those. A particular pain that causes enormous pain for developing with appcache. So I'll tell you in a second, don't do that. Right? Don't have your development environment set up with caching. It creates incredible nightmares. But there's a little tip we can use to get around that, and I'll look at that in a second. Another thing that's really important to keep in mind is only things which are explicitly cached, basically the URL points directly at a resource. There's no partial match, there's no wildcard, and only those are cached. And that includes things referred to from a style sheet. So if you have @import and import other style sheets, they will not be cached unless you cache them directly. Similarly, images in a style sheet, and this is a bit of a gotcha as well. So be very careful that whatever you want to be cached, you explicitly cache, no matter where it lives and how it gets into your web page or web application. Now, the only exception to this is that any page which includes a manifest attribute in its HTML document will be cached, right, which is good. Now, I can't go into details why, but otherwise, effectively, we would have to actually cache all the pages in our site for them to be cached, which means the first time anyone visits our site, we would suddenly have our server being hit for every one of our pages, which you may want to do from a performance perspective, but you probably don't. You can't overwrite this in the network, right? If you include, your page will be cached if you included a manifest attribute linked to an app cache manifest. It will be cached. That's all there is to say about that. The MIME type I mentioned, but this is really important. But ironically, it can be our friend. It can be helpful, but if it's not working, if caching's not working for you, you're serving it as the wrong MIME type. And this is a very, very common first-time problem for people. So as I said, do not develop with app cache turned on, because refreshing, it creates persistence and nightmares that are almost impossible to overcome. However, if we serve our app cache with the wrong MIME type during the development phase, and then we're in production, we just switch to serving with the right MIME type, that is a way to go about that. Obviously, you want to debug the actual aspect of whether your caching is working properly, but for the development of your site as a whole, just don't do it. Don't go there. Speaking from experience, it creates incredible nightmares. Now, when is the cache updated, right? It persists forever. What if I change the cache? Well, in fact, anytime you change your cache, the manifest file, then that will be updated. And what the browser doesn't then go and grab all those resources all over again. It will check, it will check which have been refreshed, which have been changed since it created its cache, and then will recache any which have changed. So this is where version numbers come in. If you add a little comment with a version number in a manifest file, then as you change your manifest file, change the version number, that touches that file, and the file itself must be changed. You can't just touch it in the server. You actually have to change the file, and having done that, then things will be recached. So that's the reason why I mentioned that the version number can be very valuable here. A little trick, though, is the user, and I won't explain why, but you can find out or come speak to me, the user has to refresh twice. Right, first to update the manifest and second to actually update everything else at the moment. So the persistence persists even beyond this. You have to refresh twice. Right. The caching is really sticky stuff, right? It can be a bit of a nightmare. However, it can provide some great functionality. Very briefly, I've got a mistake here. IE 10 now supports appcache in the latest developer preview with awesome stuff. So basically, across all modern browsers now, it's supported. And the really cool thing is that it's really backwards compatible, right? If someone's offline, this is not supported, well, they're offline, right? What do they expect? But and particularly widely supported in mobile devices where offline is probably more of an issue. So there's a list. I won't go into it. These are all online, and this is kind of updating all the time. As I said, I've actually changed the slide online, but not here on the local server. There also are some limits to keep in mind. Some of the browsers give you unlimited resources to cache. Some of them are limited to 5 and 10 megabytes. So that's worth keeping in mind if you've got a particularly large application or you're pulling down lots of resources. But they're typically in the order of 5, 10, up to 50 megabytes, and sometimes they're unlimited as well. Now, in the last 2 minutes or so, I am going to talk about a little tool I built to make your life a lot easier. It goes and does most of this stuff for you. Right? And of course, this being the web, we have to lose the odd vowel there. So we call it Manifesto, a bit of an active homage to Modernizer, which we're going to hear about tomorrow. That's where you can find it. This is what it does. It basically creates a manifest file for any web page that you visit. So it's a bookmarklet. It goes and does, it grabs links to all sorts of stuff, and particularly things like images in style sheets and so on. The sort of things that might not initially be easy to go and track down. So it goes and creates a manifest file for you. But what I want to tell you is don't just use what it creates for you, right? It's not creating the perfect manifest file. It's creating something that could be useful for you then to edit. So think particularly about which pages you want to cache and which JavaScript should be used only when you're online, right? And should be whitelisted. So let's just give a bit of go. Well, let me see what it actually does. So we're going to visit the website for our conference here, and it happens to be a bookmarklet. I'm using it in Chrome, but it works across all modern browsers. We click Manifesto, and it generates within the page itself a nice little set of instructions that says what you should do, step 1, 2, and 3. And down here, although it's not possible to actually see because it wasn't created for projection purposes, but it basically lists images, style sheets, add imported style sheets, JavaScript files. So basically, it goes and creates a manifest for you. And all you have to do, again, using the magic of content editable, another great HTML5 feature, you can just select all that and you can paste it in your file. And you've got the version number, the date, the whole business there ready to go. So that is Manifesto, to basically mean that most of our presentation here is not very useful now because this will do it for you. We love those kind of robots. I'm probably about to hit the wrong button. Oh, there we go. Right. So my time is just about up, so there's a little bit more reading. I've got a really detailed article, it's about 10,000 words at webdirections.org, all about how to use the app cache and the various things I talked about. There's the tool, there's a link to these slides, and there's my various handles. You can get me via email or websites or Twitter and so on. So thank you very much for that. Please get offline and enjoy the HTML5 app cache. Thanks a lot.